Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of perseverance, transformation, and second chances. Today's story follows Emma Carson, a young woman who steps up to help her injured uncle by taking over his taxi job. What she doesn't expect is to cross paths with Alexander Blake, a millionaire CEO, whose encounter sets her on a path to a completely new life. From humble beginnings to a world of opportunity, Emma's journey shows that sometimes the greatest changes happen when we take a leap of faith. Please subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. It was a cold, silent night in Springfield when Emma Carson sat in her small, cluttered apartment, listening to her uncle's voice crackle over the phone. The dim light from the flickering bulb above her cast long shadows over the room, and the stack of overdue bills on her coffee table reminded her of the harsh reality she was facing. At 19, Emma found herself caught in the whirlwind of adulthood, trying to juggle a myriad of responsibilities. She had always known that life wasn't going to be easy. But this moment, sitting on the worn-out couch, listening to her uncle's desperate voice, felt heavier than anything she had experienced before. "Emma, I can't lose my license. I've worked too hard for this." Jack Carson's voice rasped through the phone, his words tinged with desperation. "I've got nothing else. Please. I don't know what I'm going to do." Emma's heart ached as she listened to her uncle, the man who had raised her after her parents passed away. Jack was 60, a taxi driver for as long as she could remember. He had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, raising her with love and the little he could offer. But now, after all these years, his health had betrayed him. A severe back injury had forced him to step away from his taxi job. And with medical bills piling up, his livelihood was hanging by a thread. "Uncle Jack," Emma said softly, struggling to keep her voice steady, "we'll figure something out. You're not going to lose everything. I'll make sure of it." There was a long pause, then a soft cough that made Emma wince. She could hear the pain in his voice. Jack had spent most of his life driving through the bustling streets of Springfield, picking up passengers from all walks of life. It was all he knew, and it was the only way he could provide for himself and Emma. But now, that was in jeopardy. "I've been driving for nearly 30 years. Kiddo, if I lose my medallion, I'm done for. They'll give it to someone else, and I'll have nothing left. I'm not getting any younger. Emma, this city isn't kind to old men." Emma clenched her free hand tightly, nails biting into her palm. She knew the weight of the situation. If Jack lost his taxi license, everything he had worked for would slip through his fingers. She couldn't let that happen. She couldn't stand by and watch the man who had given so much to her lose everything. "Uncle Jack," Emma began slowly, trying to calm the storm in her mind. "Maybe I can fill in for you while you recover. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but it's better than nothing. Right?" She could hear the disbelief in his voice. "You? Honey, you're 19. You're a woman. For God's sake, they won't let you drive a taxi. Especially in this industry." "I don't care," Emma replied with determination, swallowing her fear. "I've got a regular driver's license. And if I can get a temporary hack license, I'll be able to drive your taxi while you recover. I've done some research, Uncle Jack. I know the city allows temporary permits under extenuating circumstances. It's possible." There was silence on the other end of the line. Emma could almost hear Jack processing her words, the skepticism slowly fading. He had always been protective of her, but she knew he would never stand in the way of her trying to help him. "You think you can handle it?" he asked, his voice hesitant but not dismissive. "I have to. You've done so much for me, Uncle Jack. Now it's my turn to help you." The line went quiet for a moment before Jack sighed, the sound filled with both relief and worry. "All right, Emma, but just be careful out there. It's not an easy world behind that wheel. And if things go south, don't say I didn't warn you." Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She wasn't going to back down now. The next morning, she woke up at dawn, barely getting any sleep the night before. She threw on her cleanest t-shirt and jeans, trying to ignore the nervous pit in her stomach. Her hands trembled slightly as she caught the bus across town to the Springfield taxi depot. The place was a far cry from the image of a polished, professional office. Instead, it was a rundown lot filled with yellow cabs, the air thick with the smell of oil and exhaust. When Emma arrived, she was greeted by a man with a cigarette dangling from his lips. Leaning in the doorway of a small office trailer. "Lost?" he asked lazily, flicking ash onto the gravel. "I'm looking for the manager," Emma replied, trying to hide the nerves in her voice. "Walter Murphy." The man gave a lazy shrug and pointed toward the door. Inside, she found a burly man with salt and pepper hair sitting behind a metal desk cluttered with paperwork. His nameplate read, "Walter Murphy, manager." "Yeah," he said, looking up at her warily. "I'm Emma Carson," she said, standing a little taller. "My uncle Jack Carson has been driving for you for nearly 30 years. He's hurt, and I need to drive his cab while he recovers." Murphy frowned, clearly skeptical. You're just a kid." "I'm 19, Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. "And legally allowed to drive. I've researched the city ordinances. And there's a temporary permit for cases like this. I can fill in for my uncle until he's well enough to return." Murphy leaned back in his chair, eyeing her with suspicion. "You think the guys here are going to let you drive? This place isn't exactly welcoming to women. You sure you're up for it?" Emma stood firm, not backing down. "I don't care what they think. My uncle can't lose his license. I'll pass whatever tests you have. Just let me help him." Murphy paused, the tension in the room thick as he studied her. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed. "You've got 2 weeks before we make a decision. Get the city to issue you that license. And I won't stop you. But if you slip up, I'll yank it. Understood?" Relief flooded Emma's chest. Understood. She left the office with a provisional hack license in hand, feeling like she had just won a small battle. It wasn't going to be easy, but she had no other choice. Jade didn't know it yet, but that taxi would soon be the key to not only saving her uncle's livelihood, but also changing her own life in ways she never could have imagined. The following days passed in a blur. Emma's life was consumed by paperwork, municipal regulations, and a crash course in taxi training. Each morning, she woke up early, fought her exhaustion, and did everything she could to keep herself going, because she knew her uncle was relying on her. She took the defensive driving test, memorized every local ordinance, and made sure that each piece of paperwork was in order. But the more she learned about the demands of the job, the more she realized how much she had underestimated it. The first few days behind the wheel were filled with a jumble of new experiences. Emma's fingers would grip the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she navigated the city's chaotic streets. She learned how to manage passengers with varying degrees of politeness, or lack thereof, how to avoid dangerous parts of town, and how to cope with the ceaseless noise of the city that never seemed to stop. It wasn't glamorous. The taxi smelled like old French fries. The seat was uncomfortable, and the work was grueling. But there was also something empowering about it. Every time Emma successfully completed a fare without incident, she felt a surge of pride. She was doing it. She was taking care of her uncle. By the end of the week, Emma had learned to navigate the busy streets of Springfield with surprising ease, even picking up on the best routes to avoid traffic jams or unruly passengers. She was still getting used to the long hours. Though, it wasn't just about the endless driving, it was the mental strain. The never-ending vigilance. There was little room for rest. And every shift felt like a race against time to earn enough to pay the bills. Then, one fateful afternoon, everything changed. The radio crackled to life in the middle of a slow run through the city's downtown area. "Car 17. We've got a priority passenger pickup at the private terminal. Are you available?" Emma considered ignoring the call. She was tired, her eyes stinging from the constant strain of being on the road for hours. She was about to let the radio fall silent when her gut told her to take it. Priority fares paid well, and every dollar counted. She grabbed the radio and responded. "This is car 17. I'm on it." When she arrived at the private terminal, surrounded by sleek black limousines and tinted SUVs, her battered yellow cab stood out like a sore thumb. She sighed. brushing her dark hair into a loose ponytail in a feeble attempt to look more professional. As she got out of the car, the passenger emerged from the terminal. He was tall, his sharp cheekbones accentuating his intense features. He carried a leather briefcase and wore a crisp navy suit that screamed wealth and confidence. He walked up to her window, his dark eyes already assessing her. "Are you Emma Carson?" His voice was measured, professional, as if he was already scrutinizing her every move. Emma nodded, trying to keep her composure despite the way her heart raced. "That's me," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt bubbling inside. He didn't waste any time. "I'm Alexander Blackwood," he said, flipping open his phone. "My assistant booked this taxi under my name. I need to get downtown for a series of meetings." Emma tried to mask her surprise. She'd heard of Alexander Blackwood before. He was a businessman, a CEO of a massive tech company, Blackwood Innovations. Rumors about his wealth and power circulated throughout the city. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, preparing to ride in her old, battered taxi. He didn't seem put off by the condition of the cab. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself or the air of competence she projected. Despite the rundown vehicle, whatever it was, he gave her a curt nod and slipped into the backseat with a practiced poise. As soon as he settled in, he pulled out his phone and began making calls. He spoke in calm, authoritative tones, discussing mergers, venture capital, and corporate strategies like it was second nature. Emma tried to keep her eyes on the road, but it was hard not to listen. This man wasn't just any CEO, he was the kind of person who had the world at his fingertips. As they neared the downtown area, traffic thickened, and Emma skillfully navigated the maze of cars. In the rearview mirror, she saw Alexander wrap up another phone call, his eyes now meeting hers through the mirror. "How long have you been driving a taxi?" he asked, his voice slightly amused. Emma hesitated for a moment. "Just a little while," she replied, trying not to laugh at the idea of herself being calm. "I guess I have a lot riding on this." She tried to sound casual, but the words tasted like a lie. She had no idea how much longer she could keep this up. But she wasn't about to admit it to him. He arched an eyebrow, as though studying her. "You're surprisingly calm for a newbie." Emma couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh, a nervous sound that was more out of habit than anything else. "I'm trying to stay focused," she said, keeping her eyes on the road. Finally, they arrived at a gleaming glass tower in the heart of the city. Alexander handed her more money than the fare required. Emma's eyes widened at the generous tip. But she didn't say anything. She wasn't in the business of questioning good fortune. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching slightly as she took the money from him. He gave a polite nod. "Can you wait here for about an hour? I have a follow-up meeting. If you're free, I'd like to use you for the rest of the day." Emma blinked, startled by the offer. Sure," she stammered. She had never thought about spending an entire day driving someone around. But the money was too good to pass up. And besides, there was something about Alexander's calm confidence that intrigued her. What she didn't know was that this encounter, this seemingly insignificant ride, would set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. The next few hours passed in a blur. After the first drop-off, Alexander had a series of meetings scattered across the city: business, strategy, negotiations. Emma kept the engine running in between stops, waiting patiently as he dashed in and out of high-rise buildings, met with executives, and discussed deals worth millions. She couldn't help but feel a little out of place, sitting behind the wheel of a rundown taxi, while the world she was glimpsing through the glass window was one of power and sophistication. Yet, as much as she felt like an outsider in that world, there was something about it that drew her in. Every time Alexander returned to the car after a meeting, he had a new set of priorities to attend to, but he was always courteous to her. He never made her feel small or insignificant, which, in Emma's experience, was a rare thing. She had dealt with countless people in the city who dismissed her, looked down on her, or treated her as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. But Alexander was different. He seemed to value her professionalism, her calm demeanor under pressure. And perhaps, he saw something more, something he hadn't yet put his finger on. Emma was beginning to realize that there was much more to him than the polished exterior he showed the world. As the day wore on, they made their way to a boutique hotel in the financial district. Alexander had completed all his meetings, and it was nearing the end of their time together. But before he exited the cab, he turned to Emma. "I want to thank you for your work today. You've been punctual and resourceful," he said, offering her a business card with his company's logo. "Blake Innovations. I know it's not easy," he continued, "but you did an excellent job today. If you ever decide taxi driving isn't enough, and you're interested in something with a bit more stability, let me know." He handed her the card, his fingers brushing hers briefly. Before stepping out of the cab, Emma stood frozen for a moment, staring at the card in her hand. Alexander Blake, CEO of Blake Innovations. It was the last thing she had expected, an offer from a man whose world she had just glimpsed. A world so far removed from her own. She tucked the card into her pocket, unsure of what to make of it. She felt a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Why would someone like him be interested in someone like her? She had no degree, no corporate experience, no connections, just a girl driving a taxi to pay the bills and take care of her uncle. The rest of the day felt surreal. By the time she had dropped off her last passenger, it was well into the evening. She had spent hours on the road, delivering people from one part of the city to another, listening to their stories, their complaints, their petty arguments, and sometimes, their laughter. But there was something about today that had shifted. It wasn't just about the money or the bills anymore. For the first time in a long time, Emma had seen a glimpse of something else, something bigger than her day-to-day struggles. A different life, one where she could make a real impact, where she could use her skills to do more than just drive a taxi. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her uncle. "The doctor says surgery is mandatory. No driving for months. I'm so sorry, Emma." Her heart sank as she read the words. The gravity of the situation hit her hard. She knew her uncle's back was getting worse, but hearing that he would be out for months was a reality she wasn't prepared for. He needed surgery. He would need constant care, and she would have to find a way to support them both. She had no idea how she could keep going like this. But then, as if on cue, Emma remembered the business card in her pocket. Alexander Blake, Blake Innovations. A part of her wanted to dismiss it. It felt too far out of reach. Too impossible. What could someone like him really do for her? But another part of her, the part that had always been fighting for a way out, fighting for a better life for herself and her uncle, saw this as an opportunity. It was a lifeline. That night, Emma didn't sleep much. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the day, about the taxi ride, the man in the suit, the offers, and the weight of the decisions she would need to make. But the one thing that kept running through her mind was the feeling she had when she was behind the wheel of that taxi. Not just the stress, the exhaustion, or the pressure to make ends meet, but the pride. The pride in working hard, in doing what was necessary. And now, maybe it was time to do something bigger. Something that would truly change her life. The next morning, Emma found herself sitting at her kitchen table, her fingers tracing the edge of Alexander's business card. She didn't know what would come of it, but she knew one thing for sure. If she wanted her life to change, if she wanted to change her uncle's life, she would need to take a leap of faith. She couldn't keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. It was time to step into a new world. As weeks went by, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life was on the brink of something transformative. She made the decision to call Alexander Blake. After a nervous conversation, he invited her to come in for an interview at Blake Innovations. When she walked into the sleek office building, the sharp contrast between the taxi world she knew and the world of high-stakes business hit her like a wave. But she kept her composure, focusing on her determination. After a few interviews and discussions, Emma was offered a junior coordinator position in the logistics department. It wasn't just a job, it was a chance to step into a new life. A chance to show what she could do. Alexander helped her uncle secure an extended medical leave on his medallion, giving Jack the time he needed to recover without the fear of losing everything. As time passed, Emma proved herself at Blake Innovations. Her work ethic, her ability to thrive under pressure, and her resilience earned her respect from colleagues. Alexander continued to mentor her, and they grew closer, both professionally and personally. Eventually, Emma and Alexander became more than just colleagues, they became partners, both in business and in life. One evening, after a particularly challenging day, Alexander took Emma out to dinner. With a gentle smile, he proposed a toast to the woman who had transformed not only her own life but also his. The two of them had built something together. Something lasting. As Emma looked around at the life she had built, a life she never dreamed was possible, she realized that sometimes the greatest opportunities come when you least expect them. And all it takes is a leap of faith. If you were inspired by Emma's story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and transformative stories on life stories.